You look back at your resumes and you think, man, there was a trajectory here because I was being prepared for something. Come from a Southern family. We were in what's kind of considered the Midwest in the very southern part of Indiana, but it's still very southern and a little bit Appalachian. Um, my grandfather was on one side was a coal miner. My grandfather on the other side was he built muscle cars. My mother's parents were disciples of Christ. Grandma was Pentecostal. There was actually some conflict in my family about that. Um, but I loved all of it. And I went to the Nazarene church with my cousins. I went to Awana, which was a general or maybe more conservative Baptist organization, youth group for kids, which was great fun. Uh, but I went to all the churches. I even sang a little bit in the Catholic choir with a friend. So I just tried them all. We grew up in an area that was mostly farms, lots of coal mines and farms, small town. Everybody knew everybody for better or for worse. That was great when I was younger, not so great when I was older and when I came out and when I started rebelling. It was a mixed bag. But it's made me who I am. So my parents decided I need to go to evangelical college where there were more boundaries. And so I did. Well, my first spiritual awakening was as an English major. I discovered the modernists, James Joyce, Herman Hesse, T.S. Eliot. But when I discovered those writers, Virginia Woolf was another one. It was a great spiritual awakening for me, and I also connected with a professor who was actually not very well liked at the college that I went to because it was an evangelical school, very conservative, and he was not. And he had us read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and then we had to write an essay about it. And he was when the essays were being handed back in class, he was tossing them on people's desks and telling them how much they sucked and all this kind of stuff. And he got to me and he said, Miss Loveless, if you would come to class once in a while, you might turn out to be a really good writer, B plus. And I had gotten the highest grade in the class, which was the first sense of I was a freshman, and it was my first sense of affirmation at this school because it was so conservative and I was so confused about everything. I'm very grateful for Dr. Fred Milley in my life because I really connected with him. I showed up in his office and there was a little group of us born again English majors that hung out, and but it was about that time that I started to realize that my sexuality was not wired as everyone else's was. And I mean, the place I was in was so homophobic. It was just anybody who had any proclivities in that direction was just talked about mercilessly, and all those kinds of things. And so I dated boys and, did what I was supposed to, but suddenly women came into my purview, and that changed everything. Boy, uh, it was terrifying, to think, because I had all this stuff in my head about, oh my God, I'm going to hell. This is, this is an abomination. That's the word that comes from Leviticus that's applied to us. I was just, these scriptures rang out in my head, and hurt my self-esteem, caused me a lot of shame, and also caused me to drink and do a lot of substances. And one of the other things that happened was I could find no place in Christianity that I felt comfortable. So I started exploring the occult, which went over really well with my evangelical friends and colleagues. And so I ended up in the psychologist's office at this university and underwent an early form of reparative therapy that just really messed me up. It messed me up bad. And my salvation was really falling in love with a woman and realizing that, this is who I am. As I came out, I started to connect more with the lesbian community around me and in the nearby city. There was a whole bookstore that was just for us, and everybody hung out there. And that was like doors opening and opening, and to be involved and to have so many friends in this wonderful community. We went to a bar called the Lexington Club, which was named after the big Lexington Club in San Francisco. We hung out there, and I remember the first time I danced with a woman in that place. It was absolutely magical. People talk about bars being spiritual places in the LGBTQIA community. And I think back then for us, it was like it was a safe place. And it was a place where we could be who we are. And so I got in a long-term relationship. It ended in disaster. That was really my first dark night of the soul. Because I did not know what to do with myself after that. So I moved back home because I couldn't function. That was just a really dark time in my life, really awful. And lots and lots of partying, lots of doing substances alone, being depressed, all that kind of stuff. And one day my mom brought an envelope to my apartment. She came to see me and left an envelope on the counter, and I opened it. It had a little newspaper clip, and the clipping was from the Disciples of Christ regional newsletter that in the region, the Northern California, Nevada region, they had ordained a gay person and had they were thinking about doing this for all LGBTQI people. And she left that, Mom and I didn't talk about church a lot at that point, but she left that clipping on my kitchen counter. I still have it around here somewhere. But that planted a seed in the back of my mind. At some point, things got so bad there, I decided to move to California. I was working in a bookstore and had worked my way up to department manager or what, some middle of the road thing. And so I moved to California. And one of the ladies that I worked with had friends that lived in Richmond, and they had an au pair apartment in their house, and they offered it to me to stay. It was a tremendous gift. I look back over my life, and these things like this would come together for me that would just make things easier. Here was this wonderful couple that offered their apartment to me. It was for just enough time that I got a great job managing a bookstore, and that kind of stuff came together. And during that time, I moved out of there to the South Bay and decided I was going to go get my psych master, kind of a niche area of psychology called transpersonal psychology, which really takes the spiritual into account in things. And the transpersonal folks have done all kinds of wonderful research about altered states of consciousness, and they talk about consciousness a lot. And I was very blessed to get to study with people like Charles Tart and Stana Christina Groff, and to read Ken Wilber, and those kinds of, because it gives me that psychological, spiritual foundation that shows up so much in my sermoning. I graduated from undergrad kind of CD level, barely, but I started discovering I was smart during my psych masters, and I did really well there, and I made a lot of new friends. And one of the projects we had to do this psychodrama thing, and in the psychodrama, uh, played a Pentecostal minister as a joke. This is on tape somewhere around here, on VHS tape. And I played this Pentecostal minister, and everybody was in stitches and in tears and everything else. And when we were decompressing about it later, it was a final project. Someone said to me, "Jeannie, are you called to ministry?" And I thought that was the most hysterical thing I had ever heard. It's like, right. But it kept after me. It wouldn't leave me alone. And so I finished my master's degree, and one of my professors, I found out, was not just a very well-known psychologist and researcher in transpersonal psychology, but she was also an Episcopal priest. And I went to her and tentatively knocked on her door and told her what I was feeling. And she says, "You should check out some of these schools. You should check out PSR and Church Divinity School of the Pacific." And, they're all part of the Graduate Theological Union. I applied to PSR because it looked good. And I mean, that was it. I applied to it because it looked good and got in. And they offered me an apartment, everything, and I moved up there. And I had no idea what I was doing there. Most people would come there, "Oh, I want to be a minister. I want to be a chaplain. I want to be a nonprofit executive director." What? Had no idea. I started to embrace the process, but in order to embrace the process, I had to do an awful lot of healing. And so I did spiritual direction, I did therapy, I meditated, I got sober somewhere in there. Yeah, it was a very formative and transformative time. I also met Christy. The first time I met Christy, we lived in the same building. She was in seminary, but she was in the last year and I was in my first. And she parked in my parking place. But it definitely went uphill from there. She graduated and went down to serve as one of the directors of church relations at Chapman. So we carried on a long-term relationship, and I grew and healed, and so I just stumbled through this in the right ways. I don't know. And ultimately found this little congregation across the street at University Christian Church that I got involved with. And that was my first work in pastoral ministry. I started to find a home again in the church. And those people in that little church at university were a tremendous part of my healing. And it was there that I was ordained. I was the last ordinand they had in that church before they closed. They'd been in existence for 150, 60 years, and I was the last one. I graduated, and we moved back to Arkansas. She was pastoring the church in Russellville, and I was serving as chaplain at University of Arkansas Hospital. And while I was back there, I also Hurricane Katrina hit, during that time. And that was a formative time for me because I was chaplain on call that weekend. And they started airlifting everybody. They couldn't land in Metairie and or New Orleans because of the weather. So they started medevacing everybody to Memphis and UAMS. And it was like nothing I had ever experienced before, to get to help people who had been separated from loved ones, who had no idea where their families were, their pets, their homes, and that was a formative time for me too. And I left UAMS thinking I wanted to continue my journey as a chaplain. So when we moved back out here, because Christy wanted to get her doctorate at the GTU, we moved back out here. I thought I wanted to be a chaplain, and I interviewed 15 or 20 places and just could not find a job. And then one weekend, the Disciples of Christ regional minister phoned me and said, "Hey, there's a church over there by you. Their minister has abandoned the pulpit, and they are in a world of hurt and don't know what to do. Can you go over there and see if you can do anything?" And I've never not been in church since. And Prop 8 happened, and we were all devastated by that. And the disciples region here kind of bungled that whole thing. They just were not supportive of us. And we took them to the mat about it. And I was hurt about that. I was really hurt, but I wanted to do ministry. And so I found out about ordained ministerial partnership standing in the United Church of Christ. And that was a possibility for me because I was already ordained in the Disciples of Christ. And I knew that the UCC had a lot more, that their justice stances were really strong and more where I wanted to stand. And so I went through the process and became ordained in the UCC. And I served one church as an interim senior pastor, and then somehow ended up at United Church of Hayward. So yeah, I bring all of that. And on top of that, I bring my recovery stuff, and I bring all the spiritual experiences that I've had, and all the experience I have as a mama, and the experience I have as a partner, and the experience I have being queer, and brings so much to ministry. It's like it was, you look back at your resumes and you think, man, there was a trajectory here because I was being prepared for something. I'm getting ready to turn 60 this year. And there's been a lot of water under the bridge. And all of it has transformed me and conspired to make me who I am. And I honestly, at this point, can't think of any vocation, any calling that fits me like this one. And to have experienced the healing that I have experienced, it gives me such joy. So to do that, it's chaotic and it's challenging, and sometimes it works and it's beautiful. And it's working at United Church of Hayward, and I'm very excited about that.